So therefore it's a rule set. It's a rule set that says this is what physical feels like. And if that is your only input on physicality, then of course your mind believes it. But being able to sort of move between the different realities, to sort of experience that for yourself is evidence. And I think with all the sort of evidence that quantum physics has created over the last few years, it's circumstantial evidence. You could take it to a court, and there's probably more evidence for this virtual model of reality than what there is for an objective reality, a reality that exists in and of itself. So this is where I'm coming from. I don't think that there's one base physical reality that exists somewhere. I think they are literally, like the old expression, it's turtles all the way down. And when you get all the way down, what you're left with is you're left with consciousness. So to me, all reality exists within, the space of consciousness. So some of the out-of-body experiences that I've had with over the years that have really sort of helped me sort of get my own feel for reality. And these are my beliefs from my own experiences. I remember some of the first experiences I started having while age 35. I would have this ritual. I practiced for a whole year before I finally had, conscious out-of-body experience. And when that first one came, it was a very short-lived experience. It was probably only minutes, and it was only taking place in my lounge. I didn't even get outdoors. But it was long enough to inspire me to want to press on and take the journey much deeper. And so I'd double my efforts. I remember I'd go to bed earlier, so maybe 10 o'clock instead of 12 o'clock, midnight. I'd wake up earlier, and I get into that magical sort of 90-minute period, which is even reported in the Vedic tradition, where 90 minutes before sunrise is the perfect time to do a spiritual practice, because it's reported that that is when the atmosphere is thickest with this, prana, chi, that universal energy, before everybody else wakes up and starts sucking it up. So I would wake up at those hours. I would practice the techniques, which I'm going to give a few today. And I remember after that first experience, that took me a year to finally initiate. In the second week, I had 2 more out-of-body experiences that I was able to initiate through a conscious practice. The week after that, I had 5 out-of-body experiences in 1 week. And it seemed as if I finally hit this threshold where I could almost will the experience. It would take me maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, but it got to a point where it was somewhere within that range and I would be out of body. In the first sort of 30 or so out-of-body experiences, I had this sort of ritual. I would feel that vibrational state. I would then know I was about to have an experience. I would then suddenly have like the experience I had when I was a child, where it felt like I was on a roller coaster, and then I'd be standing in the middle of the room. I'd usually either practice lying on my sofa or in one of my reclining chairs. And so whenever I came out of my body, the first thing I would do is I would look down to see my physical body to make sure it was okay. So I'd just sort of do that as part of this ritual. I remember on this one experience, I came out of my body and I quickly looked around and I did this double take. I was, fuck! My body was, it was gone. It was missing. I was like, who took my body? I was like, it's just 1 second. I'm out of body and somebody's taking my body. And there was a bit of panic. And then there was this voice sort of washed over me, and it really relaxed me. It was like, your physical body is absolutely fine. You're nowhere near physical reality anymore. And I was like, but I'm in my lounge. And this voice was like, no, you're not. You're not in your lounge. You believe you're in your lounge, and it's creating a thought form which represents your lounge. Look closer. Look at the design differences. I was looking around, and there were differences. It was not my lounge. It had that idea of my lounge, but it was not a replica of my lounge. And I said, okay, now what? And he goes, well, I'm actually standing almost nose to nose to you, but you're wrapped up in this thought form, which you would relate as kind of like a dream, like like he was talking about, like a lucid dream. And I was like, okay, so what do I do? He said, just let go of the idea, of this thought form of your house, and you will then see me. And so I thought to myself, okay, let me now see reality beyond my projection. Had that clarity of mind, said something to that degree, and then literally the thought form was gone. And I was standing in this field with this man that was almost nose to nose with me, and he basically took me on this tour of the astral planes, what we would call the astral planes, or the religions would call the afterlife. And it was a fascinating experience. It seemed like it was hours, but I was probably no more than 10 minutes out of my body. So, I literally had enough information after I came back to where I felt, I could probably start writing a book on this topic. There was so much that I learned. And what I also learned, this is now, like I said, this was age 45, just going back a few years when I was 23 years old and I moved to the UK. I was living in a place that had a lot of paranormal activity. And my ex-wife at the time, my wife at the time, now my ex, was, she was panicking about some of the stuff that was taking place. And mother-in-law had these psychics sent over, these mediums sent over to us, but I was totally unaware of it. And a knock came at the door, and I opened the door, and there was these 3 women standing there saying, "We're here to sort out your non-physical issues and such." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so they came in, and they did this clearing, and it was quite amazing. You could really feel the difference energetically. And at the end, maybe about an hour into this, one of the mediums pulled me aside while the others went into the lounge with my wife, and she said, "I feel a very strong presence around you. I'm picking up the name Blue Skies." And I was like, "That's the curly-haired man." It kept coming to me in all those times. And the guy who was now with me on this particular experience at age 45 was also describing to me that he is now looking after me. He's my new guide. And that there had been a transition from guides throughout our lifetimes, that we don't just keep exclusively the same guides, that guides too advance with different levels, and they have their own sort of path to growth. So I had this different guide. And over the next year, I just practiced even harder. I was really dedicated to this path. And I started having experiences where it felt like I had now learned enough to where I was now helping other people, and not just in physical reality. I remember I used to go to this sort of religious meeting, which was put on by the Baha'is. The Baha'is is a faith that's born out of Iran. And it's a very all-encompassing religion in the sense that their founding sort of principle is unity. Unity through diversity. And it's a very beautiful religion, but it still has its sort of, you can tell it's man-made constructs, which are very limiting. And I remember talking to the spiritual leader that used to run these events that I was curious about, because I didn't seem to have anybody else I could talk to about what was happening to me. I thought maybe, other spiritual people, and I started off with religious people. And I remember him saying to me after I opened up to him, he was like, "You should leave the dead to the dead. You shouldn't be doing this stuff. This is not what, God intended." And I was like, "Well, why is God allowing me to do it if I'm not supposed to be doing it?" And he said, "Well, I'd maybe think about that question. Maybe it's not God allowing you to do it." And I just felt the fear. I just felt it was his fear mind. And I felt it was, it was not the truth of reality. I thought, this was a very black and white sort of description of reality. And it wasn't mine. It wasn't one that I'd adopted. So I thanked him for his time, and I went about my business. And I remember about a year or so into having these experiences, something really sort of troubling, but yet at the same time, powerful took place. I remember I was in my lounge chair in the early hours of the morning, my reclining lounge chair. And it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd woken up out of bed, I'd come downstairs, got on the chair, put on my eye mask to practice getting out of body. And about 20 minutes or so into practice, I suddenly felt those powerful vibrations, which we call the vibrational state. I could see through the eye mask, so my clairvoyance was now active. And I remember leaning forward in a motion, within my energy body to sit away from my physical body. And the moment I sat in my energy, sort of body out of alignment with my physical body, I could suddenly see there were 3 human beings sitting at my feet. And it freaked me out. I was like, fuck, who the hell are they? It scared me right back into my body. I couldn't see through the eye mask anymore, but I was in that waking sleep paralysis. And if you've ever had the deepest level of sleep paralysis where you can't even use your vocal cords, so if you're calling out and you can't move your body, so no muscles working, you can't use your vocal cords, so you can't speak. And I knew these humans were there, and I'm in close proximity, and I'm like, help, help. I think I'm yelling at the top of my voice, help, but I'm like, help. Calling out for somebody to come and sort of shake me to wake me out of this experience. But it just wasn't going to happen. And then the vibrations came back, and suddenly I was out of my body again. And my energy moved out of alignment with the physical body again, and there was the 3 people sat there. And then was a 4th one that walked through the bay window of the house. And so there were now 4, and I was really getting freaked out. I've been out of body many times up to that point, in that year, but never had I encountered other people in my house. It just seemed like, this is a private space, and that shouldn't happen. And then I wrestled with this again, struggled, tried to get back in my body, blackout again, so I was no longer aware of non-physical reality, but I was still in paralysis. And then the vibrations came back again, and I was out of body again. And then there was a 5th person there, and I was like, holy shit. And I really struggled with this. And finally, I closed it all down, got back in my body. I shook it off. I practically ran out of the lounge. I was like, oh. And I went upstairs, and I just couldn't sleep. And I got in the shower, and I remember pulling the curtain thinking, why am I even going to bother pulling the curtain? They're there, and they can see through the curtain. I know they can, because I've been out of body, and I can see through walls and other stuff, because it's a different level, a different dimension of reality. And all sense of privacy sort of just left me on that night. Over the course of the next few days, a lot of paranormal things started taking place. And I knew it was these individuals trying to get my attention. But I was just like, I don't want them having my attention. I don't know who they are. I don't know what their intent is. And I really don't want to talk about it. So I walk into rooms, and maybe an object would sort of slide or fall off, a shelf. And, it was really quite interesting because, manipulating energy from another level of reality in that way takes a lot of focus. They really wanted my attention. And I remember I ignored it for a good few days, almost a week I think it was. My son at the time was 8 years old. And I remember having my office downstairs on the back sort of the house, and him walking in through from the garden, and he just sort of stopped. And I could peripherally see him sort of out of my left eye. He just stopped, bolt upright like this. And then after a second, he proceeded. And he came back downstairs a few minutes later. He goes, Dad, I came from the garden, and there were 2 people standing right behind you, but they weren't people. In the sense, he was trying to describe what we'd say is a ghost. He could tell, with his own clairvoyance, that they weren't of this world. And then he it literally stopped him in his tracks. And he went upstairs, and he said, I got upstairs, and there were 2 more people up there. And so I'm coming back downstairs because I'm a bit scared. And I was like, I didn't know what to tell him. I remember that year teaching him how to have out-of-body experiences, and I wanted to be able to validate it for him by us having a shared out-of-body experience. But I didn't know how to express to him because I was still struggling with myself that there were people hanging around in our house. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to confront this. I'm going to have to get back out of body, and I'm going to have to speak to these people because they don't seem like they're going away, and now it's impacting my son. So I went to bed that night with the intent to have these experiences. My alarm went off. I woke up. I went downstairs, got in my chair, reclined it, put my eye mask on, went through my ritual. And again, it probably took me 20 minutes or so, and I started feeling the vibrations, ramping them up, and then I separated from my body. I remember standing there on guard as soon as I got out of the body. I was like, I was Neo from the Matrix, so I was going to go into attack. But there was nobody there, or not that I could see. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go outdoors. So I thought I'd walk through the bay window, go outdoors and survey the local area. And as I got near the bay window, this dude had been standing in like the shadows, one of the corners of the room, and he stepped out as I got near. He was like, hello. I was like, fuck! I literally almost had a heart attack. And I kind of jumped, and I said, who are you? What do you want? And I was fierce. I was ready. And he was like, I'm dead. And I was like, you're dead. I'd never quite, thought of it that way in such, sort of in that light. And I was like, of course, okay, fine. And I go, what do you want? And he goes, I don't know what to do. And I was at a loss. And you could tell I was at a loss. And that clarity of mind just wasn't coming from the out-of-body state. And he said, look, I know I'm dead. I remember how I died. And then suddenly things were different. And I could still see my life going on that I knew, but I couldn't communicate with people. Every now and again I thought I got, somebody's out of the corner of their eye, they'd see me, but no contact. I then started bumping into other people that I could communicate with. And then some of them, knew they were the same as me, and some of them didn't have a clue. And what he meant by that was some people don't know they're dead. And we can get to that, but maybe in the Q&A. And he said, so anyhow, one day I suddenly just felt, this, sort of, that I needed to do something. He said there was a bus and it just stopped in front of me. A physical bus he was talking about. And remember, like our physical body, our energy body has we have that duplicate. And so the chair has an energy form. A bus would have an energy duplicate too. And he said the bus stopped and suddenly I felt like I needed to get on it. And I was like, this is hilarious. In my own head I was like, he doesn't need to take a bus to get around, but fair enough. So he felt compelled to get on the bus. He got on the bus and he said he was just riding around on this bus. And then suddenly he felt compelled to get off at a certain point. And he got off, and that was in my neighborhood. And he said, I was wandering past this house, your house, and suddenly felt compelled to come in. And he was talking about, I know what he was talking about, because when I'm out of body sometimes, you feel like this tug on your energy field. And it's kind of this autopilot, that if you were to trust it, you could surrender to it, and you would go somewhere, like through an energy tunnel, like somebody who has a near-death experience will talk about. And he's describing all this stuff to me. He said, yeah, so I came into your house, and I saw you lying down in this chair, and you were flopping about and doing all kinds of weird stuff, and I was like, what's he talking about, flopping around? And then he goes, and then suddenly you were standing up, and then you were gone. And I was like, oh my God, he's just described an out-of-body experience from another perspective, from a non-physical perspective. Physical from his perspective, but non-physical, from my perspective. And I thought, it was really interesting. And I said, well, what did you do next? He goes, well, I thought you could probably help because it was like your soul was coming out of your body and you seemed to know where you were going. And I thought maybe you could help, so I hung around. And then I went to get some other people that I know. And I was like, thanks, man. But I can understand it from his perspective. If you feel stuck, if you feel you don't know what to do next, there's a lot of people who have an atheist belief. They don't have an afterlife belief system. There are people who have a very strong belief system, and on death, they can find themselves in a sort of another virtual reality, which is as real as this, which equals their afterlife belief system. All the great religions talk about these various afterlife systems. So I'm not saying it's black and white like religion is saying, heaven and hell and purgatory and such. But I can certainly understand how we can come to those conclusions if you're only having one out-of-body experience, like some of the great sort of prophets might have had. Like, look at Muhammad. It's the Quran is filled with this idea of me. And last night I went to my father's house. All these insinuations of having these very etherical experiences, these otherworldly experiences, and I think all the great prophets talk about them. This is not an artifact of modern man. This is something that's been going on since humans have been on this planet. So after he described all this stuff to me, and literally these other people suddenly came into the lounge as well, and we were communicating, and with the knowledge that I'd accrued to that point, I said, look, I think what you're doing is you're clinging to physical reality. You're clinging to all you know. I've found that when I go other places, I can leave this dimension entirely, and I can connect with other places. There are other places. Your focus has been this because of your fear. And I said, if you can start to shift past your fear mind, start making a connection maybe to a loved one, then you might see a light, or you might experience a shift, and suddenly you'll be somewhere else. And within a short period of time of just speaking with them, they'd all sort of, I could tell they literally made a shift somewhere else, individually, not together as such. They all probably went to their own individual heavens, their afterlife belief systems that are really sort of geared towards their actions from this life. I'm a firm believer that this is exactly what takes place. I don't see karma or a cause and effect as something that's meant to punish us. I don't see it as a punitive system of punishment. I actually see it as a form of protection. A form of us being able to sort of make rights when we've made wrongs, and for to literally through our own self growth, we are able to grow on that with that internal barometer, by doing this internal work. So one more experience, and then I'm going to pass it over to you so we can have a nice long Q&A. One experience that I had soon after that, because a lot of questions were raised about, the afterlife and loved ones and such. And I remember on this one night, I was in my chair again, practicing. I could suddenly see through the eye mask, and there was this really large portal that kind of opened up. It was like a vortex or a tunnel of light that, again, near-death experience, somebody that would have an experience like that would report. And I remember having that tug of energy, and I just let go, completely surrendered to it. I went through this tunnel, and I was suddenly standing in this city on another level of reality, which was solid and physically real. And the transition from one physical reality to another physical reality without a break in consciousness was profound in itself, because it literally is supporting this idea that physicality is a set of calculations for a particular reality. And I'm standing there now, very physical, in another physical environment, solid, real place. And I get talking to this woman that is now living in this city. And she told me, look, I've only been here a short while. I'm certain it was synchronicity and not coincidence that I was speaking to her. She was recently deceased from physical earth. Not everybody in those territories, those what we call the afterlife or the astral planes, not all of them have even been to this level of reality and taken a physical incarnation here. A lot of them they're not even aware that this other dimensional level exists. Because the astral planes are so vast and expansive. I mean, even with the non-human stuff, the ET stuff, a lot of that, the origins are on these other levels. They're very much interdimensional beings. So anyhow, I'm talking to this woman, and she was telling me about, I've been here a short while, and I registered, she'd only actually been dead from our world for about a week. And she was telling me about, oh my God, I'm in this community, these people are wonderful, I'm starting to, make friends. And I was really grateful to be shown this. And then suddenly she vanished, like she was teleported away, like in Star Trek. And I was like, where did she go? And I'd had that happen before, but I'd never been curious enough to follow somebody's energy. And I thought, let me just feel her energy. And suddenly I could feel this, like I was being transported, flash of light, and then I was standing in a church. The hall was about the size of this hall. And there was a casket on one end, and this whole congregation facing towards the casket. And I knew the moment I arrived, it was the woman's funeral. And she was standing there near the front. And then she started wandering around, and she looked so peaceful. She looked so at peace that she was alive. And that this literally was just a transition. This was one aspect of her multidimensional self that had stepped through that doorway and left behind a shell, the physical body. And the mood in the congregation was what you would expect. People were grieving. People were missing her. And I remember her walking around, and she would sort of put her hand on somebody's shoulder, and where she'd sit down in an empty chair next to them. And I could hear her say things like, you remember when we were 12 years old and we broke into such and such and we did this, and although I knew that most of these people couldn't hear or see her, the shift was very tangible in that space. It seemed like I was there with her for about an hour as she made peace with people. And the whole mood it literally shifted. People were leaning towards each other, they were more smiling, there was a few sort of lighthearted jokes. And I found it fascinating because, like I said, when my father died, it was 2 months of me grieving until, I remember going to his funeral about a week later, and in America we have open casket funerals where possible. And I remember stroking his face when I was 10 years old at his funeral and just wondering, because of my experiences that I had, that if I'd see him or if that he was there. And I didn't see him with my clairvoyance. I wasn't aware of his presence, but I kind of had a feeling he was. To then visit with this woman at her own funeral really gave me peace of mind that my father did attend, his own funeral. I then got curious enough to ask, after that experience and another out-of-body experience with one of my guides, what happens with people. And he said most people who are very cognizant of their passing will come back for their funeral. All that energy of people mourning them, he was referring to as an example, because those tugs of energy you feel sometimes, and then if you let go and you go with the flow, that you arrive somewhere. That's what happens to other people who die. When they're in the afterlife environments, suddenly they feel that tug, and that's that grief, or that's somebody else calling to them in some way. And they can arrive back to this level, as what we would then refer to as a ghost, but it's a human being. They're just taking form on another level reality. So I'll leave it there with my experiences, and I hope it's opened up some questions. I think we have about 25 minutes, so any questions?
What's the ritual you use to leave your body?
Great question. Yes, I think it's very important. If you're going to lead people into this stuff, it's great to talk about it, but to be able to have a direct experience yourself, to verify it for yourself is very important. So what I would suggest is, first and foremost, to make space for it in your life. Because this is one of those things, if you can prioritize something, things will happen. And so it's a dedicated practice. I would suggest, just like with the practice that I would still maintain, is go into bed earlier. Even before getting into bed, all day long, your relationship that you're building with the out-of-body experience before it even happens. Like a manifestation wizard. The manifestation wizard would think it's already so. And having that energy of it's already so, I would be thinking about, the experience. What was it like? How did it make me feel? And I would feel that way all day long. I would literally be setting up the energy before I even get into bed to practice the experience. So all day long, I'm holding that energy in all of my being. It's already so. And I was holding that feeling. And that in itself is quite powerful. I then get into bed, and I'll set the intent that my last conscious thoughts before I fall asleep is that throughout the night, when I spontaneously wake up, it might seem spontaneous, but we wake up every 90 minutes. We sleep in 90-minute cycles. The first few sleep cycles we're very much in deep delta sleep, so we may not be aware that we've stirred a little bit, sort of shifted from one side of the bed to the next or whatever. But when we get closer to the 6-hour mark or the 7.5-hour mark of sleep, we've started having longer REM cycles than delta cycles. And this is when, if we start to wake up in those brief moments between sleep, so between the sleep cycles, if we can wake up conscious in those moments, instead of sort of waking up and looking at the alarm clock with one eye and like, oh, I got another 15 minutes, and going back to sleep, that's not very conscious. So my advice is, when you get into bed at night, to set that very strong intention. Tonight, I will become conscious and aware between sleep cycles. Tonight, I will become conscious and aware when I'm dreaming, so I can wake up within the dream. Tonight, I will become conscious and aware of any phenomena that takes place that could be an unconscious out-of-body experience. Because I promise you this, from the evidence that I've gathered, all of us are having out-of-body experiences every single night. The difference is, at what level are you having that experience? For a lot of us, the energy body is just going slightly out of phase with the physical body after we fall asleep, and it hovers sort of above the physical body like a helium balloon until maybe that sleep cycle finishes. And during that process, your energy body, literally energy field opens up and it's recharging just like the physical body is. It's collecting in etheric energy, which is vital energy for the physical body. So if we can get to a point of realizing that when we're dreaming, we're in the energy field. Our awareness is usually in the energy field of our energy body. So even if we were to become lucid in a dream, we're technically already out of body. Like the experience I had of not seeing my body on that one experience, but still being in what I thought was my house, that was just a thought form, a dream. So realizing that it was just a dream because somebody else helped me become aware of it, I could then dissipate the dream and have an out-of-body experience proper. I would suggest that lucid dreams, when you become lucid in a dream, first, get as much as you can from the dream experience itself. You were probably dreaming that, your subconscious was maybe processing something. There are opportunities to explore in themselves. They're safe environments because it's a personal virtual reality experience. But when you've gotten the most from it, you can, like I've done, you can say something like, now I experience reality beyond my projection. And you can usually then have the out-of-body experience proper with your astral body. So getting into bed, setting the intention in those ways. Every time you wake up in the night, to realize you've woken up, stay perfectly still. Hopefully you haven't even opened your eyes. If you've opened your eyes, close them back up again. Feel into the energy around you. What can I feel energetically? What can I see? Once you close your eyes again, do you realize you can still see through your eyelids? That's a sign that, you're in the in-between state and something interesting is happening. What can I hear? Can you hear sounds like, a tornado, banging noises, popping sounds? There's all kinds of interesting phenomena that takes place in that in-between state. So every time you wake up, it's waking up with conscious awareness because your energy body is constantly in flux during sleep. It's catching one of those moments where you're usually unconscious and you become conscious long enough to experience this stuff. No great magic has to take place. This is just building those mental muscles to do this stuff. And the emotional muscles, that self-love that says, look, if this is important to me, then I need to do this. I need to have that conscious awareness. When you've woken up and if there's no phenomena, nothing that you can reach out to and connect with, then I would say then you use a technique. A technique would be maybe for the next 15 minutes, you keep your physical body absolutely still. As you keep your body absolutely still, you pretend you're already out of body. Again, classic manifestation. Do it as if it's already so. So now you're going to pretend you're walking around your bedroom, pretending you're picking up objects while you make that clear intent that out-of-body experiences are safe, they're beneficial for your spiritual and personal development, and as much as you can immerse yourself in that visualization, at some point over the periods of days and weeks of doing this, and you're holding your awareness outside your body, you're going to learn that ultimately, when you have an out-of-body experience, nothing is coming out of your body. I've had over 13 years of conscious out-of-body experiences. That's over 1,000 conscious OBEs. And other very experienced out-of-body explorers will say the same thing. Nothing's coming out of your physical body. You are dealing with, a multidimensional reality that overlaps itself and is connected through energy pathways. When it feels like you're lifting up away from your body, floating away from your body, your awareness is already shifted into your energy body, and all that's happening is your conditioning of form and movement is being activated. But nothing's physically coming out of the body. The energy body, the one that we have with the classic 7 chakras from the Eastern, sort of philosophy. This is the closest and also a very dense energy vehicle, just like the physical body is a very dense, sort of form. The first energy body is almost as dense, and it is energetically connected to the physical body. This is not what we use to have an out-of-body experience. When we have an out-of-body experience, one of two things happen. We can sometimes produce what's called the etheric duplicate. It's a sort of a temporary form that we can use to have an out-of-body experience through what we call the real time zone, which is the near-earth plane. If you're in the near-earth plane, in the real time zone, you are literally able to see physical reality happening in real time. If you were to come out of your bedroom and go visit the local Tesco, say, they're stocking shelves, you would see them stocking shelves. This is a real-time zone experience. You could go anywhere in the physical universe at that point, and you would experience reality as it is in real time. You could visit Mars. If there was anything on Mars, you would know it. If you visited the moon, you would know it. When we have an astral projection experience, we're using our astral, what we refer to as the astral body. And we're projecting our consciousness into another level of this continuous energy field, which is us. It's literally just building the awareness of this. There's so much misinformation out there on the internet. There's a lot of fear-mongering. But ultimately, this is our heritage. It's who and what we really are. These are the tools that I would recommend. They're easy, they're simple, and people think it needs to be rocket science. It really doesn't.
How do you feel about using psychedelic substances to the same extent?
I don't personally have a problem with it. I've taken DMT before, and it was, 3 puffs,